There are approximately 3.16 billion base pairs of DNA in the human body. This DNA doesn't just determine things like our ear shape or nail structure, it may also carry the deepest and even the darkest secrets of our past. Even if this sounds exaggerated, you're not the only one who thinks so. Some scientists think the same way, and this idea has driven them to investigate the subject further. According to these studies, in the relatively recent past, much of the known world was caught in an almost constant cycle of violence. It was a time when escape was nearly impossible and violence was almost universal. We can think of this as the first global conflict humanity ever experienced. What's truly intriguing is this. The traces of this horrifying period may not be found in bones or ancient weapons, but in our own DNA. When scientists examined modern human genomes, they noticed a very clear genetic crisis, one that is difficult to explain in terms of population structure. At some point, the population dropped so suddenly that genetic diversity was visibly reduced. This is not particularly rare in nature. Humanity has experienced similar events before. For example, around 900,000 years ago, we went through a massive nature-driven population collapse. But this event was different. It appeared to have occurred much more recently, during the late Neolithic period, across Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. And the striking part was that this genetic blow almost exclusively affected men. While Y chromosome diversity dropped dramatically, mitochondrial DNA, which is passed down through women, was barely affected. In other words, something was selectively targeting men on a massive scale. If the cause had been an avalanche, an earthquake, or a widespread epidemic, men and women would have been affected in roughly equal numbers. But this wasn't the case. This led scientists to a single conclusion: extreme and widespread violence. According to researchers' estimates, by the end of this process, up to 95% of the effective male population in Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Middle East may have disappeared. In theory, only 1 out of every 20 men survived. In such a scenario, women may have outnumbered men by 17 to 1. As you know, no war in recorded history comes anywhere close to this level of devastation, not even the world wars. You might wonder, if such a catastrophe really happened, why are there so few traces of it? The truth is quite the opposite. There is so much evidence that it's hard to miss. In Europe alone, more than 250 sites dating to the late Neolithic period have been identified where clear signs of violence were found. Neolithic human skeletons show far more severe trauma compared to those from other periods. Analyses indicate that a large portion of people experienced multiple violent attacks over the course of their lives, especially men. Some of these sites are truly chilling. One example is the Talheim death pit in Germany. Around 5000 BC, at least 34 people were brutally killed there. There are no signs of defensive wounds, suggesting they didn't fight back, they were trying to flee. Nearly all fatal blows were delivered to critical areas like the head. Most of the victims were children, elderly women, and men. Younger women were largely absent, likely because they were taken captive. This wasn't an isolated case. The Schlitz massacre in Austria was even larger than the one in Germany. Nearly 200 people were killed, some of them dismembered. Once again, children and adolescents were notably few among the dead, suggesting they were captured. But perhaps the most disturbing sight of all is Herxheim. This wasn't a settlement that had been raided. It was most likely the raiders themselves. Near the village, pits were found containing the dismembered remains of hundreds of people. This time the victims ranged from newborns to the elderly. Bones were broken, skulls were split open, and on top of that, some bodies showed signs of being cooked. Yes, this strongly suggests cannibalism. What's even more unsettling is that all of this was done on a large scale and in an organized manner. And yet, The settlement itself consisted of fewer than 50 people. After all of this, one question inevitably arises. What drove humans to such extreme levels of violence? There is no single definitive answer. However, one possibility stands out. This explosion of violence coincides with the time when humanity transitioned into the agricultural revolution. People settled down, populations grew, and villages were established. And of course, there were consequences. Now there were fixed targets to raid. Land, crops, livestock, and people were all concentrated in one place, a perfect opportunity for a species already accustomed to violence. Additionally, societies increasingly organized themselves around patrilineal groups. Men from outside were not accepted, while women could move more freely between groups. This made the Wayus. Additionally, societies increasingly organized themselves around patrilineal groups. Men from outside were not accepted, while women could move more freely between groups. This made the Y chromosome far more vulnerable compared to the rest of male DNA. Perhaps it was the combined effect of violence and these social changes working together in a synergistic way. Whatever the case, it happened, and its trace is still clearly visible in our genes today. Fortunately, things are very different now. Compared to most of history, we live in an exceptionally peaceful world. Our lifespans are longer, and more importantly, fewer of us are dying violently. Of course, we still have problems, but at least we don't have to worry about skull collectors or cannibalism anymore. And that, at the very least, is something.